Welcome to the second Western Sydney Symposium, brought to you by AILA and Western Sydney locals, Cumberland City Council. I've seen a couple of representatives from Cumberland City Council, so please raise your hand if you're from Cumberland City Council. Oh my Lord, this is thank you. And the other wonderful partners, of course, our wonderful partners at Street Furniture Australia, who I will ask just to raise their hand in the room, although most of you know most of them, but it's good to see that, that they're there. My name is Ben Stockman. It gives me great pleasure to say that I'm CEO of the Australian Institute of Landscape Architects. Last year, Street Furniture Australia and AILA gathered local stakeholders to explore how to better activate Western Sydney and bring joy to the public space experience for communities here and elsewhere, and to provide exemplars for elsewhere and how to have the best response. This year, we're here to talk about climate action, a vital challenge for the built environment sector and society as a whole. Today, beyond those gathered in the room today in Western Sydney, we also welcome our live stream audience from around Australia and the world. So we are being beamed everywhere today. Today, we have 6 speakers and 2 panels from a wide range of organisations who will talk on diverse topics. So let's take this opportunity today to listen to them, to learn, to share each other's knowledge and to keep the conversation going. For those of you who are familiar with AILA, you may be aware of one of our AILA artefacts that we are exceptionally proud and honoured to have. It's a dar being a talking stick that was gifted to us by one of our original cultural ambassadors, Auntie Ruby Sims from southeast Queensland, Bundjalung country. She gifted that to us a number of years ago as a reminder to always be working with country as we walk on the country. That travels to AILA events. It serves as both a reminder and to absorb conversations around us. And it is with us today. It's come from Western Australia, courtesy of David Martin, who was attending a grounded event in Western Australia last year. And so that's a very important part of AILA's archives. So as mentioned, I'm CEO of AILA. AILA is the peak body for landscape architects and represents over 3,000 designers of living infrastructure, bound together by commitment to our strategic values of climate positive design, connection to country, diversity, equity and inclusion. AILA is proud to lead a dynamic and respected profession, one that creates great places that support healthy communities and a sustainable planet. You can see why it is then so important and why we are so pleased to be able to partner with Street Furniture Australia, a company that's defined by the commitment to climate positivity, local manufacturing, and making nature and outdoor spaces accessible, welcoming, and comfortable. Partnerships are at the heart of good design. They are at the heart of the built environment profession, and they're most definitely at the heart of landscape architecture and of the Australian Institute of Landscape Architects. We're lucky to share a ride here this morning with Dr. Sebastian Pfautsch, our first speaker today. And the stories he was telling me really illustrates the wonderful things that happen when those partnerships come together. I won't go into the long story for it, but some of you may be familiar with Memorial Park at Marylands. The story he told me about that park was one of extreme transformation and a positive transformation through good design, through collaboration with Cumberland Council and a whole range of other stakeholders that transformed what was, I'm not quoting Sebastian here, so please don't growl at him afterwards. It sounded like quite a barren, unwelcoming experience. And of course, in the middle of summer, why on earth would a parent with young children take their children there to be sunburnt, baked and hot? There's nothing worse if you're a parent to have tired, hot, uncomfortable children. The transformation, however, did turn it into a green oasis with shade, with accessibility and a whole range of things. The vibrancy that made that, the transformation that made that park a now vibrant centre for the community that brought people together really illustrates what happens when good design meets collaborations and partnerships for social, economic, health, sustainability outcomes. So I'm hoping today that many of you will get inspiration from the stories that you hear, the knowledge that's shared, and that it'll be inspiration to keep that conversation going far beyond today. Because as we all know, great things happen when the right people get together in the right place at the right time, which is exactly what we have here today. So with that, it gives me great pleasure to welcome our very first speaker for today, Professor Sebastian Pfautsch, to be followed by David Martin. Welcome, Sebastian. Oh. The first hiccup for the day, we've got a heckler at the back. Oh, sorry, Chris Manosky. Thank you very much. My goodness, I got caught up with Sebastian. I'm terribly sorry, Chris Manosky. I'll blame my notes here. Oh, I'll now pass the mic to our co-host, Chris Manosky from Cumberland City Council. Exactly what I mean by partnerships. Thank you very much.
I was going to say a tough act to follow, but not anymore. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 2024 Western Sydney Symposium on Climate Action in the Public Realm. I'm Chris Manosky. I'm the Manager of Place and Economy at Cumberland City Council. What that means is I look after a few different things, some of it being smart cities, economic development, and placemaking. So it's an absolute pleasure to be here today and to see so many passionate individuals in the room, some of which I've worked with, and I'm happy to see you all here. Today, we're united in our commitment to building a more sustainable and resilient future for Western Sydney. So before we dive into today's discussions, I too want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land and pay respects to all elders, past, present, and emerging. And I also want to extend a special thank you to Street Furniture Australia, which is a local business in Cumberland area, and Elia, of course. Their generous support and dedication to advancing climate change and climate action in our public spaces has been instrumental in making this event possible. We're grateful for their leadership and their ongoing contributions to improving the way we think about design and our shared urban environments. As we all know, climate action is one of the most urgent challenges of our time, but it's also an incredible opportunity for innovation, for collaboration, and for creating new ways of living that are more sustainable, more equitable, and more connected to the environment. In Western Sydney, the stakes are especially high. Our region is growing rapidly, with more people, more infrastructure, and of course, more demands on our natural resources. How we design and manage our public spaces today will have profound consequences for the communities of tomorrow. The public realm, our parks, our streets, our plazas, and our green space is where the impact of climate change is felt most immediately. But it's also where we can make the most significant difference. From reducing urban heat islands to increasing biodiversity, from enhancing stormwater management to improving air quality, every decision we make about the way we shape our public spaces has the potential to create more sustainable and livable environment. So this symposium today is about knowledge sharing. It's about ideas, solutions, and the way we can transform our approach to climate action in public spaces. It's about creating a collective vision for Western Sydney that's not only resilient, but actively contributing to a healthier planet for future generations. Over the course of today, you'll hear from leading experts in urban design, in climate science, and in landscape architecture. Individuals and organizations who are already leading the way in climate action positively. We'll explore practical, real-world solutions and ambitious projects that demonstrate how we can make meaningful, positive change in our own communities. At the heart of this conversation is a recognition that we all have a role to play, whether we are policymakers, designers, engineers, or placemakers. We all have the power to shape the future of Western Sydney in the ways that we can tackle climate change and to create spaces that are healthier, more inclusive, and more sustainable for all. So, as we begin today's proceedings, I encourage you to ask, think creatively, and work together to build a Western Sydney that is not just prepared for the future, but one that leads the way in climate action, innovation, and positive change. Thank you all for being here. I look forward to the inspiring conversations ahead. Let's get started. And in saying that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Professor Sebastian Pfautsch, followed by David Martin. Thank you very much.
It's amazing. I've never been introduced twice. It's really good. Warami, everyone. We meet on Daro country, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. And I always think in this country that formally has well, 800 dialects and 250 languages. It's good to speak a few words in the language of the land that you meet on. So Warami, Welama Bami Jui Jura. Welcome to you all and good to see you people. And I think we can say one word together. So we all speak Daruk. Let's just say Warami. Oh, come on, room. Warami. Yes. Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Sebastian Pfautsch. I'm working at Western Sydney University. Just across, I teach in our vertical campus and I do research in our Urban Transformations Research Center in Hassel Street. My home campus is on Daruk land here at Parramatta South, and I'm very honored that I'm allowed to open this symposium. Thanks for Street Furniture. Thanks also to Cumberland Council. We work a lot together, and I really enjoy that kind of collaborative work around heat. I was asked to kind of set the scene, so I'm not talking too much about my own research, I hope. What I want to talk about, bring back one, yes. Oh, what is it doing? Come on, stay there. There we go. The need to scale. We do a lot, like with Cumberland, we do a lot of projects together, but they're pilots, they're a single park, they're a single car park. When we really want to achieve urban cooling in Western Sydney and any other place really that is metropolitan, we need to think about scale very seriously. And I try to set the scene with us thinking about how can we scale. If we look at this particular image, which shows us land surface temperature across Greater Sydney, you can see where the national parks are, Royal National Park in the south, Ku-ring-gai in the north. You can see the Prospect Reservoir as a dark spot. You can see how land surface temperature kind of increases towards the west, and that is counterintuitive what we normally expect with the urban heat island effect, which is based on land surface temperature. Normally, you would think the CBD of Sydney is the most densely developed place and has the most streets and transport infrastructure and so on. But we have a special situation here in Western Sydney where you can see now from this image, as you go further towards Penrith, it becomes hotter and hotter as of land surface temperature. And that is influenced by the increasing air temperature that we also see as a gradient from east to west. Some people talk, when they see this image, they talk about heat continents, so not heat islands anymore, because heat islands are kind of a confined space. Heat continents are what you see here, very large spaces that just overheat in summer, and they're very difficult to cool down again. Now, everyone here, I guess, knows what we're doing in Western Sydney right now with two significant or state significant growth areas in the northwest and in the south. There's Box Hill, Marsden Park. Oran Park is kind of finished and full, so they moved to Menangle and moved into Camden and Appin and all those areas around Wilton and the Koalas. I mean, we get this, right? It's huge. The transformation is massive at scale. So in the areas that you see are hot, and I just wanted to point out, flowing down south from Prospect Reservoir is the Western Sydney Parklands, Josh's kind of playground, yes. We also see the South Creek catchment that is meandering to the north and then entering into Hawkesbury River. These are areas that are still cool in Western Sydney. So we really need to focus on them as well to keep them cool. Unfortunately, South Creek catchment, again, most of you would probably know, there are big developments planned. And there's, of course, a new airport as the white elephant in the room with massive tarmac that is unshaded that becomes a heat island in itself. So there are great opportunities, but there are also great challenges when we look at Western Sydney and development in Western Sydney. Come on. This is what we're doing. Infrared image on the right shows you what happens when you transform a kind of a natural bushland setting into urban sprawl. Clearly, the roads and particularly the roofs are introducing additional heat. These are surface temperatures that are reflected here in those colors that you see in orange and red. Compare that to the reserve that is just next to that settlement. This one is Jordan Springs near Penrith. And you can see that the surface temperature, of course, of the vegetated surface is much, much cooler. So anywhere where we introduce hard infrastructure into these lands, we will increase surface temperatures. And Western Sydney is already suffering really, really badly from heat. This is a report that was published earlier just across in the 5 building this year by the Committee of Sydney called Burning Money. And it's exactly that. $1.44 billion every year, excuse me, is what the economy of Western Sydney pays to deal with the impacts of extreme heat events. the projections that they've done in this economic analysis point towards an increase by 2070. I don't need to read out the numbers. It's 6.7 or nearly $7 billion that we can't spend on hospitals or childcare centers or keeping our roads well intact. So there's a huge cost that comes with living with heat. We need to do something to not end up like this prediction. So what do we do across the area? Well, we do little things. There are bioswales, there's water-sensitive urban design. If you look at the left, that's a tiny bioswale. Just look at the hard infrastructure around it. The proportion of impact is very, very small. We do depave, depaving being the transformative process of reducing hard surfaces and replacing them with open surfaces, preferably with plants. This is an example here on the right-hand side from Merrickville. So it's happening in Sydney. But again, it's just a tiny verge, and it's the only example for active depaving application that I can find for the entire Sydney basin. I mean, this is nothing. We have to scale these efforts up. We did some very interesting work by painting roads and car parks with Parramatta, Blacktown, and Campbelltown councils. And we could show that, yes, we do reduce surface temperatures during extreme hot days by 13 degrees. That's a big reduction. But we couldn't pick up any reduction in air temperature because the overriding effect of the hard infrastructure around us still added so much heat that even though we had nice, cool streets, it was not enough to bring air temperature down. Surface temperature, yes, air temperature, not enough because we weren't working at the scale that we need. And then there are other examples where I think we do really well. Tree planting, of course. We did reach by the end of 2022, 1 million trees that were planted, new trees planted into Greater Sydney. Lots of communication and education around trees and green infrastructure. There are even free webinars. You can see this example here from Renew. So everyone, I guess, knows Renew as an organization looking into customer satisfaction, looking into how to get your home cooled. And then there are plant giveaways. I live in the Hornsby Shire. We have them twice a year. They give out plants. You need to bring your kind of council notices and then you get free plants. That's fantastic. But again, when you talk to the staff at those plant giveaways, the first thing that goes are the waratahs, because everyone wants to have a waratah. And then the second thing are the little things. They keep not getting the plants back to the people that they want to have in their gardens, which is big trees. They always tell you, oh, take 2 or 3 or 5 trees, when in fact you're only allowed officially to take 3 plants. But they just throw the trees at you, so you take them and plant them because they're just not getting back into the gardens where we remove them. This is the scale we're looking at. City scale, big, big transformations. So there are 2 examples here, one from Germany, one from Paris. You can see that we're working across the landscape now. So we're not doing a pilot with a tiny little bit of, water-sensitive urban design for 10 square meters. These are thousands of square meters that we transform. There are some very good examples from other European cities where they take cars out. They give the land back to people. They start to transform, and they probably feel the pressure even more than us because they're not attuned to extreme heat events like they experienced in 2003, where only in Paris about 70,000 people died. So it's that scale that we're looking at, and we do have the tools. I just wanted to highlight that we do have the tools available to us. This is from the Planning Institute of Australia, the Queensland branch. It works through very systematically through the lot scale, the street scale, and then into the regional scale, giving you the tools that you need to have to inform this transformation that we need. It goes on. What is this clicker? I'm really careful. It's very sensitive. There's, of course, the Cool Suburbs tool from Wesrock that was released earlier this year. Very, very good for development stage at the DA, or really going into your design stage where you sit at the master plan and you want to figure out what can we do? What can we actually change in our suburb to make it kind of heat proof? There's, of course, our work. I don't want to go too much into it. You can see there's 6 examples out of many working on playgrounds, as was mentioned before by Ben. We did the green track here with Transport for New South Wales that you can see in Parramatta. We work on car parks now with Cumberland at Wentworthville and at Holroyd. We do have guides out there how to reduce heat in suburban places. All of these are publicly available. We always, with our project partners, make sure that they agree that we publish them so that they can go out and not just sit in their drawers. but that they go out and really get used by the community. So lots of very local, very relevant information available. And then, of course, there's other information available from the global scale. You see the World Economic Forum working in this space. There's the United Nations Guide for beating the heat in cities. And then you can get national and also local guides that are really, really relevant with what they propose, because it will help us to scale into the kind of areas in Western Sydney where we need this transformation. Yes, we need to put more people in, but probably not the way that we do at the moment in Marsden Park and so on. So all of this information is available. What we need now is a vision. And this is just one example. You see a historic aerial photography of Hornsby. There's the station with the transport infrastructure and the Pacific Highway going through. And you can see it's not very green when you look at the residential lots. It's pretty bare, actually. It's the same view in the other picture that looks towards the station, where you see these high-rise buildings in the background. That's the station. And so look at how much canopy there is. Of course, that takes time to develop, but it's possible. The point is, it's possible. So we shouldn't just shy away and so think, oh, we can only, get a small birch these days, and then we squeeze a medium-sized tree in there. These are all big yew trees, and there are lots of liquid ambers, exotics, and natives in a mix. A lot of canopy. Some of these suburbs further to the east, Taramara, Waitara, 65% canopy cover. I measured that. So it's possible. We just need to have that vision to get there and then really stick with our plan. We have all the tools. Stick with our plan to achieve a greener and a cooler city, and particularly in Western Sydney, where the people will need it desperately. Thank you very much. And I hand over the baton to David.
Thank you, Dr. Pfautsch. Always a hard act to follow, and we're ahead of time. I'll just get this clicker working. Single click. I'll start with the cover slide. So I've been asked to give you a bit of a national overview. I've spent a lot of my career working in Western Sydney, but really this overview is what's happening around the country, and with a little bit of a hint about how it relates to things around action at a global level. So I'm talking about this thing called settlements, which is a fancy policy word for anything between a village to a capital city. And talking about the blue and the green, and really just talking about what we do framed now around as a form of essential infrastructure. This is quite a meaningful shot for me, because this is me exactly to this day, 12 months ago, visiting my daughter in Vienna. And while my wife was a bit sick with something she'd picked up in Istanbul, I had the opportunity to go to the UN headquarters in Vienna, and it was just great to be there. If you're a sustainability person, it's like sustainability heaven. But of course, you would all know about these things called the SDGs, and that pesky 17th one, which sort of really mucks up the nice grid, is really what I want to talk about today. And it is around the importance of what Ben Stockwin said at the introduction. We really need to work in partnerships and collaboration. The challenges of what we're seeing in our cities is beyond any one professional group. And we really want to bring the sector together to work on these things, because there's lots of benefits that come from collective impact. So SDG number 17, you probably know about it, but that's probably what's taking me from the talk at the global level down to the theme today of what's happening at local level. But we'll go national now. This document came out. I know that Sebastian Pfautsch was one of the collaborators on this document that came out early last year. It's probably the best $98 you might spend. It's a 30-page document, but it's not really aimed at you guys in the audience. It's aimed at policymakers, particularly in planning, engineering, federal government level, because the area that we've been working in, green infrastructure, green grids, urban forestry, there's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of jargon. And we thought it was time, if you look at the policy scaffolding in Australia, there's heaps and heaps of documents around coming out of local government, territory and state governments. There's a total absence in the policy pyramid until this document occurred last year. And it's just really a conversation starter. Just consider it really the way to have a discussion with a CEO of Infrastructure WA, as I did last week, and other people like that who have some kind of a knowledge of this blue-green stuff. But until this document came out, there was really nothing that was nationally accepted about what describes the industry and the sector that we all work in. You would know that there's been national advocacy being driven through Hort Innovation Australia. What used to be called 2020 Vision is now called Greener Spaces, Better Places, and that's being funded through a R&D, Hort Innovation Australia, which is funding that work today. And I think many of you probably know about the newsletters and the events that Greener Spaces, Better Places are putting out there on a national level to help bring everyone together. Previously, it was only really CSIRO back in 2015, 2016 at that national level that was doing any coordination of state, territory and local government. So I guess we could say that AILA's playing that role at a national level, and thank you for Ben Stockman for being here today in that introduction. There's been a lot more conversations and talking going on. This one I attended a few hundred metres away only back in June, July, that Sebastian ran with his colleagues. And it's evidence now of a growing shift towards other co-benefits of what we do, particularly around national preventative health, that we can talk about biodiversity benefits, we can talk about cooling benefit. But, you know, what we know during COVID is the appreciation of what contact with nature and green infrastructure, how much benefit comes into people's mental health and physical health. And we believe this is probably one of the biggest cards to start playing to government, particularly at the federal level, knowing that the budget pressure on things like NDIS and the bulge in government health budgets at state, territory and federal. And we believe we've got one of the biggest solutions here to avoid a lot of those costs. But we've got to start learning the right language around avoided health costs. We've got to start talking with epidemiologists. We've got to start talking with economists. And we've got to start engaging with new players, such as the health insurance sector, who people like Bupa in the UK, health insurance, are already funding some of the biggest urban greening programs right across UK, Scotland and Ireland. And those things are starting to happen in Australia. We've also got the formation only a few months ago of a fancy thing called the NUGIRT, the National Green Infrastructure Roundtable. That's really came out of the handbook discussion where we had only about 6 or 7 authors, but I guess the breadth and depth of people that were contributing said, what are we going to do now? So this grouping has come together and is currently sitting at about 12 organisations. Arborists, there's 2 organisations, Institute of Horticulture, Landscape Architects, PIA, Institute of Public Works, Engineers Australasia, NGIA, which is the 18,000 nurserymen that grow, nursery people, I should say, that grow about $3.5 billion worth of farm gate product that's leaving, coming into Australian cities. Yet the rest of what we do, we haven't been able to monetize and make the economic argument. But this group moving forward, which has been led by and facilitated through Greener Spaces, Better Places, is hoping to influence change. 6 of the members made a joint submission through to the federal government. There was a very dry, yes, sorry, it's a bit blurry. This grouping, led by AILA, with working with those organisations, which you know who they are, and then AILA with this new group have been making submissions through to the federal government on this thing called the NUP. So we're kind of NUPsters. So National Urban Policy is probably the city's policy. When Albo was the previously infrastructure minister, there was, you know, some attempt at the federal government getting involved in cities. So this submission that was made in June, July has led to lots of other tiered submissions. There's one from Australian Sustainable Built Environment Council, who made 6 key recommendations to the federal government. Number 6 was the development of a national green infrastructure framework and strategy. So we're going back to the federal government, trying to make a budget request to make into the March budget. Whoever's in government at the end of next year, we're trying to get some money inserted into the federal budget to start developing things like a national framework or strategy, because it's the federal government that's been absent in all these discussions. It is sensitive. Go slow. Okay. So also, look, I've had the opportunity just in the last 3 or 4 weeks, I've been bouncing around the country. There's been a lot of urban greening conversations going on, and I think a lot of us think we're just talking to the converted. I was down in a urban greening conference run by the NGIB in Melbourne in July, a great 2-day event. Then there's been, this one, we've got Belinda Bean here speaking at Burnley Horticultural College, about 200 people. That involved talks, workshops, and technical tours in the western suburbs. We've also had industry-led events like City Green, which you know is a manufacturer of tree vault technology. Another Ben from City Green has been hosting these events starting in Penrith last year, and I suggested he take that roadshow up to Brisbane, which he did in April this year. And that's now going down to Melbourne, and that is a forum much like this one, talking about the benefits of trees, but that's been industry-led, and a lot of that has come through the handbook. There's been giveaways of the handbook, and that's sort of been a bit of a starting point to have these events. So there's certainly a lot of dialogue going on. And then Institute of Public Works Engineers is already delivering CPD to its members in urban green infrastructure asset management. So asset class recognition, is sort of dry and boring as it sounds, is such a pivotal important thing. So some councils are already recognising the value of their green infrastructure assets, but they're the exceptions, and there's no national acceptance yet. That's probably one of the things that we're talking to the federal government about, making green and blue infrastructure, or particularly green infrastructure, formally acknowledged asset class. Up in Queensland, I've been assisting AILA Queensland, who again, great partnership here with 4 bodies, Planning Institute, Institute of Architects, another group called Design Institute, have been pitching to the Queensland government around Olympic legacy. And these are the sort of the top 4 ideas. And I'll draw your attention to number 2, which is a visionary, a vision, a bit like what can we learn from the world's first Green Games at Sydney Olympic Park, and how is the world's first Green Games potentially influencing the world's first Blue and Green Games? So already Stormwater Industry Association and these groups are really putting a lot of pressure and lobbying the Queensland government to look at this very bold vision of a green grid spread across the whole of southeast Queensland. Very bold thinking. A lot of blue and green infrastructure investment is going to be needed, but these are the conversations that are going. So while we're having a change of government in Queensland and a 100-day review of the Games Venue Legacy Delivery Authority and what its remit will be, I think it's going to be exciting times. But the next probably year or 2 are critical for these groups to continue to put that pressure and be in the face of Queensland government, because this living, growing legacy is really what these groups want, and a coalition of 12 local governments that are making up where most of the Games venues are being held. Just last week, just got back from Perth. While you could say that Queensland represents longer term opportunities, there's some more immediate challenges. You probably heard a lot about the shot hole borer disease that's impacting the tree populations in Perth. And then these are not necessarily shot hole borer infected trees. These are stressed trees that are probably out of their climatic zone now, Lephostomans, Agonis, and these are starting, you go around Perth, and I lived and worked there in the early 90s, it's noticeable how the stress of that landscape's really starting to show. And one of the things that the WA government is now doing, and a bit of a response to that, is to develop an urban greening strategy for what they call Perth and Peel. Peel is the area to the south down to Mandurah, which makes up, as you know, Perth's got one of the largest metropolitan footprints in the world, but they've also got the lowest canopy. But this work has been done by a landscape architect, urban forester, and I just have this slide here where quantification to make that 30% target from a baseline of 16%, looking at the quantification of 7.58 million trees, how much water, blue infrastructure is going to be needed, and 1.5 billion. I think that's a bit of a bargain, actually. I think we know the billions that get spent in other forms of, but here we have the first quantification of the challenge and the funding and the water. And I think it's interesting how AILA and the people in Queensland probably need to do that kind of calculation and really get to the government and involve federal, state and local government to actually achieve this, because the urgency in WA is certainly very pressing. And sorry about the blurry slide. This is a classic thing about the number of people that are now coming together around the table around this thing called urban forestry. Is people are urban foresters, but they don't realise it, whether they're arborists, landscape architects, horticulturalists, irrigation professionals, local government, state government, professional bodies. Everyone's got a role to play in delivering this urban green and blue infrastructure vision. And might be finishing a little bit early, but I really think that we need to change the language. I've been saying this for some time. We've got to now we're seeing, unfortunately, in Perth and in the mainstream media, we're seeing a binary argument of trees versus housing. And I know, talking to Ben Willsmore, the AILA president, just we had a session in the first round table where Ben Willsmore attended. His closing comments were, we need to shift the dial. We've got to start describing what we do as essential infrastructure. We know that most of the new housing being delivered in Adelaide, Perth, Melbourne and Sydney, in the hottest parts of the metropolitan areas, as evidenced by the great research work that Sebastian's been doing here for Western Sydney. So these are kind of common problems in most Australian cities. Cheeky little slide here, and I had some help from my friends at Street Furniture Australia, and you'll notice the corporate pink there, making this argument about essential infrastructure. I know that Ben Stockman has famously been using the line, taking it from the green infrastructure from the nice to have to the must have. Now we're going into a new argument, particularly across government and treasury and finance. We've got to be describing and making the business case that we are essential infrastructure as well as affordable housing. It's not one or the other, it's both. And I also think that there's a room for the blue and the green. What is this other kind of infrastructure, particularly as landscape architects? It's not living and growing, but it's there really as a kind of community or social infrastructure. And I think if we're just putting it out there as a new form of pink infrastructure, or it might be another colour, but thinking about the blue, the green, we know about the grey, but there is this other kind of infrastructure that we're putting in the public realm as well. So thank you.
No, I'm not going near that. Thank you. That's I've already made enough mistakes today, so that's enough for me. Please join me once again in thanking Professor Pfautsch and David Martin. Thank you. That great start to the morning we have had there. Again, the reiteration of that focusing on partnership to achieve our goals. And also, yep, we know what needs to happen and now we need to scale. That's an exceptionally strong message in that first presentation. Speaking of partnerships, please, this is our first break for the day, morning tea. So please, we've got 10 minutes, I think, to grab some refreshments, cup of tea, and please start those important conversations about how we can do what needs to be done. Thank you, and we'll see you back here shortly.
As a challenge within our statutory planning controls as well as guidelines and policies. So I'd begin by acknowledging that Cumberland City Council includes urban heat in its LEP, which is its local environment plan, and its DCP, which is the development control plans, to actually try and tackle it more at the development scale. So these are things that council can control what happens in its public open space, but it can't really control things that happen with development sites unless it actually factors it into statutory planning guidelines and controls. So this is one of the ways it's done. Cumberland Council is also part of the WESROC group, which is the Western Sydney Regional Organisation of Councils, and several heat mitigation tools have been developed as part of this concerted effort. Internally within council, there are efforts made to try and incorporate it into as many strategies as possible. So we've got the example of the urban tree strategy, which helps to maintain, preserve, as well as increase the number of trees and the urban tree canopy in the area. Okay, just when I was starting to say technology work for me. Yes, there it goes. And this is the thing that I'm most closely involved with, which is the Smart Places Strategy and Action Plan of Cumberland City Council. And although it's a much broader plan that covers a lot of things that council works on, there are quite a few environment and heat-focused actions which are part of the strategy, which includes the use of environment sensors, mapping tools, and many different ways in which the community can be aware and participate in the effort. Some of the other ways in which council has been running programs and initiatives to encourage the community to be a part of tree planting and increasing the canopy cover is through some of these programs. So what you see on the left here are images from the National Tree Day planting events that were held recently, and these have been held for several years within council. And we've got programs which focus on greening our town centers, the Canopy for the Community, which focuses on greening parks and reserves, the Adopted Tree program, which focuses on greening people's front yards, and the Cooler Corridors program, which focuses on greening the parklands by planting native trees within these corridors. And I'm very proud to say that in the last 3 years, councils actually planted and maintained over 2,000 trees within the Cumberland LGA. One of the other ways that we're looking at urban heat within the LGA is to try and introduce it as part of design. So your context-based design, or what some people might know as place-based design, which is more climate responsive or heat responsive. So Maryland Civic Square is one of our premier destinations within council, within our strategic center of Marylands. And apart from the wonderful design that you might have seen in a lot of magazines here and there are quite a few elements that are meant to tackle urban heat and make it an urban cool space. So one of the things that have been done there are inclusions of water play elements that you can see in the image right there. The Civic Square also includes the use of light-toned pavers, so that the light paving can reflect off heat and doesn't get as heated as some of the other areas or concreted areas around it. And there's plenty of opportunity for shading with shade structures as well as urban green canopy that help to make the space almost like an urban oasis and an urban cool space in that environment. And now we get to the fun part, or the thing that most of you might be waiting for. Where's the smart technology in all of this? So the smart technology is actually here. Smart technology can actually be our friend, and there are many ways in which smart technology can actually assist us in our mitigation or ways in which we deal with urban heat. So one of the ways it can be done is by identifying hotspots and monitoring progress using sensors, IoT devices, and heat loggers. So you can see that little example on the right there. Another way it can be done is using visualization and mapping tools to identify trends and patterns. And this is an example of a project that we worked on with Professor Sebastian Pfautsch at Western Sydney University, where a number of heat data loggers were placed across the LGA, and then they were monitored over a period of time to identify the hotspots in the area. And this has proved to be quite a bit of valuable information for us going forward. Another project that Professor Sebastian talked about, which is the UV Smart Cool Playground, where new and innovative materials were used to introduce smart ways of dealing with urban heat and trying to cool down the space. And one of the other ways that council is working on doing this is through awareness raising and advocacy using online tools such as social media, the Have Your Say page, and websites where people can get more easy access to the information as opposed to just coming to council or visiting these places in person to find out. And we'll talk about a few of these projects in a bit more detail. We've used sensors, IoT devices, and open data in this particular project. And this case study, which is the Guildford Laneway upgrades, we'll talk a bit about how we integrated an overlay of smart technology over the activation and the revitalization of a really tiny public open space. So this laneway was pretty dead and dull and unsafe. And as part of the Safer Cities Highway project that we worked on with Transport for New South Wales, we actually added a layer of smart technology as well to future-proof the space. This included a smart bin, a wireless charging pad, a smart pole that had the capacity to take sensors, and a CCTV camera that records footfall in the area. So these bunch of data sets were being collected from the space, and we are now working on putting this up on a dashboard that will be open to the community, and the community can have access to this real-time information where they can see all these bits of data and actually try and make sense of it for more informed decision-making. And a lot of you have already probably seen this project, and this is the Memorial Park Playground in Marylands, which is the UV Smart Cool Playground as it's being called. And this was another project that we collaborated with Western Sydney University on, where you can see that in the before image, the real field of the space could go up to 62 degrees. But after the interventions where shade sails were installed and the mulch was replaced with a new material that can actually reflect and absorb less heat, the temperatures cooled down to ambient temperatures. And this is quite evident from the thermal camera imaging that you see on the top here, which is the before image, and you can see a lot of red. Red means bad, blue means good. And we can see the second image where you can see more of blue happening, less of red happening after the interventions were done. One other little project that we've been working on with Western Sydney University is the Cool Car Parks project, and we've got two trial sites. What you can see on the top is the current image where the shade structure has been installed, and it will have green vines and plants growing on top of it. And in the future, it will look like what the image at the bottom looks like, where you have trees and plants actually shading the car parking spots underneath it, because car parking spots typically, or car parking areas typically happen to be real heat hotspots because of just, concrete and no shading and, all the challenges that go with car parks. And this is one of the other small projects that we worked on with UTS, where we installed a small little planter box in space. And you can see, just looking at the thermal image at the bottom, where the space around the planter box and the planter box itself is much cooler than areas around it. So this is just another small intervention where we used heat data loggers and we used thermal camera imaging to actually see the impact, or visually see the impact of this work. You can see the graph that there's several degrees of temperature difference between the control areas that didn't have the parklet versus the one that had the parklet. And this has been very beneficial to the community in more than one way. I'd like to wrap up by just, talking about a few key takeaways from this presentation, where strong leadership is important. And we are working on seeing how trials and pilots can be scaled up. We are working on seeing how we can improve awareness within the community and have guidelines for operation at different scales. And smart technology can be your friend. Don't be afraid to use it. Also, collaboration with climate champions is important. And we've seen some of the champions speak here today, and we'll see some more come up. And that is it from me. Thank you. I'll hand it to Jeff.
Thanks very much. I've actually decided to outsource my clicking. Thank you. Jeff Morgan, principal at Hassel in architecture. So for what it's worth, this is the title of the advocacy piece I've been leading as chair of the Aluminium Working Group, the Materials Embodied Carbon Leaders Alliance, for the past 3 years. I suppose my journey started back around 2010 when I was working for Foster & Partners on Masdar University, where the facades for the laboratories here were the first in the world to use fully recycled aluminium for their structural facade extrusions. That was nearly 14 years ago. And then I found myself more recently, and I worked for Stockland on 110 Walker Street. I was asking my engineers, friends, colleagues about the possibility of using recycled or even just low carbon aluminium in the facades. And much to my surprise, I received a lot of very confused looks. So something that I thought would have moved on in that time and advanced apparently had not. And that became something that really drove me. So working with Arup's facade and ESD teams, we estimated the potential embodied carbon savings of the facades if we were to use the same billet or aluminium that was used in the facades at Masdar. We found an 80% reduction in the facades embodied carbon purely based on swapping out this aluminium. And that was really quite an eye-opener for me and the client, and then eventually led me to MECLA. MECLA was founded in 2021 to address the issue of embodied carbon in the built environment. MECLA is all about collaboration across the entirety of the supply chain to find solutions quickly. Currently, we have over 150 members and counting. Our purpose is to accelerate the decarbonization of the construction sector. And by pooling knowledge and expertise from across the supply chain, we hope to speed up decarbonization in these typically hard to abate sectors. We managed to curate a group of members from the aluminium ecosystem, including contractors, fabricators, architects, engineers, and LCA consultants, miners, recyclers, remelters, researchers, financiers, and many others. And as a group, we found a number of key challenges we needed to address. First, there was a total lack of any awareness within the industry on the challenges of low carbon aluminium. There were a lot of myths that surrounded it, And people, even like the Australian Aluminium Council, were saying, well, maybe we can decarbonize the sector, but 2050 at best. And then when we were speaking to contractors, they were saying, well, it's just too hard because all of our stuff comes from overseas and you can forget about anything coming out of China. So why be so concerned about aluminium? Well, typically aluminium is the third largest contributor to a building's embodied carbon footprint after concrete and steel. And compared to many other primary materials used in construction, it is by far the most carbon intensive, up to 100 times, as you can see there. And so what exactly is low carbon aluminium? Is it the same as recycled aluminium? Essentially, low carbon aluminium has a lower embodied carbon content compared to current global benchmarks. This can simply mean virgin material produced using renewable energy sources like hydroelectricity rather than fossil fuels, or it can also refer to recycled aluminium or aluminium with some sort of recycled content in it, which can again be made using either fossil fuels or renewables. When we look globally at the graph of various carbon intensities for aluminium, you can see that there's quite a range from upwards of around 20 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of aluminium, coming mostly out of China, to down around even less than 1 kilogram for some of the most advanced and fully recycled products. And as you can see, Australia is sitting slightly above the global average, which is really reflective of the main challenge that we have in producing low carbon aluminium. It takes an enormous amount of energy to make it. And to give this some context, in Australia, we have 4 aluminium smelters along our east coast, which consume nearly 10% of the national electricity grid capacity alone. And in Australia, unsurprisingly, the majority of this energy comes from our coal-fired power stations. So yes, our grid is decarbonizing, but just how fast remains to be seen. And the other challenge from the built environment perspective, at least when we're talking about buildings, is a bit more complicated. The majority of our large-scale buildings, and even now many of our medium-scale projects, are having their facades procured from Southeast Asia or China. So the question is, we posed ourselves at MECLA, even if we had low-carbon aluminium in Australia, which we do now, very much so, I'm pleased to say, how do we decarbonize the built environment if we import so much from overseas? One of the biggest barriers to its procurement also is around the myth of cost. So even on Walker Street, the project I showed at the beginning, where I was really strongly advocating for it, we had a lot of client support. I was shocked to hear that they were no longer pursuing it because of an $8 million premium the QS had placed on it. Luckily, I helped set the record straight and it's back on the agenda, but I think the power of misinformation and myths out there, especially when you're trying to do something new or different, is a real challenge. And as you can see there, it's only 1 to 2% of the base metal cost, excluding production, transport, assembly, and the rest. Apart from these challenges, there are many great opportunities. And one of the well-known facts about aluminium is that it is infinitely recyclable. And when you recycle it into a new product, it requires just 5% of the energy needed to make its virgin counterpart. It's also estimated that 75% of all aluminium ever produced is still in use, ready to be recycled into its next life. And the other great opportunity in Australia is to turn our current linear approach to the aluminium value chain into a circular model. Australia extracts more bauxite than anyone in the world, and we export it. We produce the second most alumina than anyone in the world, and we export it. We do, however, import nearly as much aluminium as we produce, ironically. And at the end of its use, you guessed it, we export it, approximately 95% of it to overseas for someone else to remelt. So there is really a huge opportunity for Australia, which I'm pleased to say that many of our working group members are working on, to recognize the value of this material, keep it on shore, and setting up new remelt facilities was something that the group is really keen on focusing next. So we've put all of our research and learnings into a series of small publications to help this advocacy and education piece. I'm pleased to say they've been the most downloaded documents from MECLA's website. First, we started with a 10-pager introduction to the topic, just to sort of start to educate the industry. We followed up with the 1-page kind of summary of the key issues, because 10 pages is too long for most people. And then we actually followed up with a specification guide to help people understand how to better specify in their projects. I'm also really pleased to say that this is starting to trickle through a number of our other projects at Hassel, our Park Life team, the metro that's now connecting the new Western Sydney Airport. Had originally designed the station facades in steel during the bid, actually steering away from aluminium because of its embodied carbon. But now with the great progress that we've made through MECLA, they have the opportunity to work with local fabricators and suppliers who have secured low carbon aluminium and have changed the designs and specifications in favor of aluminium. I probably can't say too much about this, our adaptive reuse project for Apple's Singapore campus, but other than that, it's really a strategic opportunity to showcase the value of low carbon aluminium to the industry. Apple have been very instrumental in not only sourcing low carbon aluminium for many of their products, but also partnering with industry and investing in low carbon technologies. So this feels really like a fantastic opportunity to leverage a client's own key drivers and ambitions and push for something really market leading. And in Sydney, our Harbourside project has recently had a pretty significant win. And when it's ready for public release, we think will be an industry first case study for Australia. As I mentioned earlier, many of our Australian facades are made overseas, and Harbourside is no different. We knew that the contractor had a relationship with a Chinese facade subcontractor, and we pushed them to ask if they knew where their aluminium was coming from. Currently, over 80% of the aluminium produced in China uses coal-fired power, many of which are captive coal plants purely for the smelting of aluminium, which is really why it sits at the top of that global average. However, the Chinese government also knew that this was a problem, so they moved a lot of their resources down to the southern regions of China. And when the team was recently traveling there to have a look at the facade contract, next please, we had some pretty good news that actually not only had they sourced low carbon aluminium, but it also came with ASI certification. So ASI is the Aluminium Stewardship Initiative, founded here in Australia. It certifies the aluminium supply chain globally, looking at issues of material provenance, environment, and modern slavery. I'd now like to wrap up with by sharing something that really made me think about the importance of all of this, and which reflects the title of my presentation today. For What It's Worth is a title of a series of artworks by photographer Dylan Marsh. Dylan was captivated by the landscapes in his home of South Africa, and in particular, the many disused gold, copper, and diamond mines that speak, in his words, to a combination of sacrifice and gain. So the image you can see here is from a few different mines. The one on the left is the Palabora mine, where I can't remember the stats, but 4.1 million tons of copper were mined out of the mine. And what he did was he took a photograph of the mine and visualized the volume of copper, as you can see represented in the sphere there, and superimposed it to give you an idea of how much earth had to be removed to create that copper. So that got me thinking about Australia. As I mentioned, we extract more bauxite than anyone in the world. It gets dug up, put into massive trucks like this. And I did know the name of that machine on the right, but I forget now. Put onto custom-made trains and train lines, shipped to shore, put on a boat, shipped overseas. And when you start to look at one of our bauxite mines, we have the largest bauxite mine in the world up in Weipa in the Northern Territory. It's just highlighted there in the box. You start to zoom in, already you can start to see the impact of that bauxite mine on the earth. And as you keep zooming in, the kind of extent of the operation becomes bigger and bigger and clearer and clearer. Thank you. And when you finally zoom in, I'm pointing there to a little black dot. That represents one of the trucks that I showed in the first image. And so that got me thinking, thanks. Next again, thank you. Next time you might enjoy one of these, or in fact, sit on one of those. Or you might engage us to do one of those for you. We all should remember what it's worth. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. You should add one other pick to aluminium foil, and just remember what it takes and how. So when you use aluminium foil, think twice. There's a lot of embodied energy. I love MECLA. Anyway, I'm Rose Reid, and I grew up and live on Gundungurra land in the Southern Highlands, and I'm here today as a director of the Product Stewardship Centre of Excellence. And yeah, it's great to have actually Jeff's presentation prior to mine. This sort of brings us back up to sort of product stewardship and material stewardship more globally. So yes, and So I'm here too. Good. Oh, look, there we go. I turned it off. Oh no. Is it the top one? Yes. No, don't know. Okay. All right. So firstly, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Product Stewardship Centre of Excellence. Then we're going to have a little review of what circularity is and where does product stewardship fit into that. And then obviously how that might impact everyone here today. So firstly, the Product Stewardship Centre of Excellence, we're an independent, not-for-profit organisation. We started back in 2020, unfortunately, with the support of a federal government grant and a number of consortium members, including the University of Technology, as the Australian Industry Group and Dentsu Communications. Our role is about reducing waste regeneration and creating positive and environmental and social outcomes by accelerating the implementation of producer responsibility across the entire product's life cycle. We work with both businesses and industry to help producers, brands, retailers design more sustainable products. And why? To conserve our resources. And we do this through better product design, product reuse, repair, recycling, and also government accreditation. We also provide and guide advice to the federal government and governments generally about what is happening in product stewardship, what are the priorities, where should government be stepping in to provide the right framework, regulatory frameworks, procurement frameworks, investment to drive more better producer responsibility. No, I've done it again. Sorry. Oh yeah, there we go. So through the centre, we do a lot of education, mentoring, research, and recognition. And so we produce a suite of resources, all available on our website, stewardshipexcellence.com.au, from practice notes, white papers, case studies to help people understand what is excellence in product stewardship. We also run a series of webinars, awards to recognise achievements. And earlier this year, we ran a forum, which was great attendance. And we also have done a detailed analysis of the benefits and effectiveness of product stewardship activities across Australia, whether that's at a material level or a product level where industry is working together, such as batteries or mobile phones or TVs and computers or packaging, to individual company activities such as Patagonia dealing with clothing, and so on. We also have a series of online training modules, which I encourage you all to have a look at to learn about what product stewardship is 101 and how businesses are applying it and how businesses or industry are applying it. We also, oh, there we go. No one's immune to the technology. We also work with a number of organisations who are committed to the same goals of the centre in terms of reducing resource conservation, preventing waste generation, and having positive environmental and social outcomes. Just an example of the various organisations, both individual companies and industry associations, we're either working on packaging or products. And also Apple has just recently joined as a supporter as well, which is great because they do a significant amount of work in terms of the materials they're putting into their products. So firstly, what is circularity? I would imagine that a lot of you are very familiar with the butterfly diagram from Ellen MacArthur and the three principles. Just to revisit those, it is about designing out waste and pollution. And why are we doing that? Because it does reduce greenhouse gas emissions across the value chain. So there is a really strong link between circularity delivering climate action outcomes. It's also about keeping products and materials in the economy. So that's about the embodied energy. There's a lot of effort going in to produce the products and materials that we use. So we need to really value those and keep them in use. And finally, the other primary principle of the circular economy is about regenerating natural systems. And we see a lot of that work already discussed today about bringing nature back into the urban environment, creating biodiversity, obviously delivering a whole lot of climate change benefits, whether it might be temperature or capturing carbon. But what's also important, a lot of our activity around climate action has been focused on the energy we consume. And that's really some work done by Ellen MacArthur Foundation really flagged that if we want to achieve net zero and address our rising temperatures, we do need to actually look at how we make and use our products. And Ellen MacArthur estimates that about 45% of our carbon impact can be addressed by how we look and how we buy, use, and manufacture products. So what is product stewardship? Some of you may have heard the word product stewardship or extended producer responsibility. Don't get caught up with those. Some people get caught up with what one might mean in comparison to the other. What the bottom line is, it's about producers taking responsibility for the environmental and human impacts of their products across the entire life cycle. It's not just about how they design it or how people use it, but also what happens to it at end of life. And there is so much that can be achieved by looking at what we can do at the front end of this product, but also making sure that when designing those products and pricing those products or materials, we understand what the responsibilities are once that product is no longer in use or that material is no longer in use and how that's recovered. We can't keep putting those environmental impacts, whether it be pollution from hazardous materials or waste, loss of resources, or any other human health impacts left to the community and society and us to deal with. They have to be built into the product. So it really is underpinned by the polluter pays principle, the waste hierarchy, the sustainability goals, and so on. So how does product stewardship relate to circularity? Product stewardship actually delivers, or producer responsibility delivers, circularity. When you think about the circularity, the butterfly chart, there's three main things you're trying to do. You're trying to use less materials in the first place, so we're narrowing. We're also trying to slow the use of materials and products, so that's about extending the product's life cycle. We're also about closing the loop, so that's keeping those materials in circulation and eliminating waste right from the design point of view. And if you have a look at the diagram, hopefully you can see it a little bit better. The writing's a bit small. The diagram in the center reflects actions across the product life cycle. So from the design and production, how can we, look at what materials we're using, making the right decisions, using less materials, using more materials produced from renewable energies, reusing materials, avoiding hazardous materials, all of those sort of things, making sure the materials are durable or recyclable, and both. But also how we consume them. How do we keep them operating all the time? Can we repair them? How do we maintain them? How do we keep them in use? And then how can we repurpose them and use those components and parts before they become at the end of their useful life? So then we start looking at, well, how do we recover and process and get those materials and those parts and components back into the economy and keep them in economy? Because when you look at that circularity diagram, you'll still see there's an arrow coming in of resources being consumed. What we have to do is shrink that. We have to really reduce that. And we also have to replace it with and keep the materials in. There's a stack of materials sitting in our buildings that we need to make sure stay in our buildings. So there's all sorts of things we can do there. And why? Because the benefits are significant. These two diagrams here, the first one on the left shows you by the different actions of taken in terms of circularity and keeping materials in the economy, we can have a significant impact. But also simply day to day in terms of our products and what we use, by extending the life of, say, a notebook for 3 more years, we can cut our emissions in half. So bringing it back down to our day-to-day choices. And this can apply, for instance, with Eshita when she was talking about the smart technology, thinking about the technology you're choosing to measure and monitor. Who are you purchasing that equipment? Are you purchasing secondhand equipment? Can you keep it in use longer? What happens to it? Can it be reused? Can it be recycled? All those sorts of things need to be considered. And all of you have the ability to make those decisions, because one of the key drivers of influencing producers is the customers who buy the products. So if you're you're going to specify what you need, what products or materials you need to create more sustainable landscapes, and I've got a 0 there, so I better stop. You've got the ability to influence that. So finally, producer responsibility provides businesses a practical pathway to achieve circularity. Those steps across the cycle help deliver a better environment for all. So thank you.
Hello. How did you outsource the clicking? Okay, awesome. I like your style. Hi, my name is June Lee Boxsell from Street Furniture Australia. As a proud AILA national partner and local business of Cumberland City Council, we are grateful for the opportunity to collaborate with them today on this very important topic of climate action. This year, Street Furniture Australia achieved 100% carbon neutral certification across all our products and factory operations, which was a process that took 5 whole years. Today, I'd like to share some of the insights we gained along the way. Very good. I will start with a brief introduction of who we are, then dive straight into climate active certification and the role of data. I will then share a story of a chair, a behind the scenes look at how durability is achieved and why that is important. To finish off, I will summarize with some practical tips for specifying street furniture sustainably. For those who are not familiar with us, we are a design-led factory based in Western Sydney. Our favourite colour is pink, especially after David's talk. As architects, our founding directors, Bill Morrison and Daryl Conybeare, taught us that good design is timeless and attention to detail is king. But good design cannot be achieved without respecting our planet. In 2019, we formed our first climate action working group and appointed our first sustainability leader, Kiara Spencer-Smith, who unfortunately couldn't make it today because she's on maternity leave. Kiara has been forensic in all her work to pursue climate active certification and verifying our targets with the Global Science-Based Targets Initiative. All our work and our data is published in this white paper, which is publicly available and updated every year. Next slide. This is my favorite slide. At the core of certification is the emissions reduction strategy, which requires evidence of real reductions year on year. As the saying goes, you can't improve what you can't measure. And we measured everything. We measured our total greenhouse gas emissions as well as where they came from. Our calculations included scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, both upstream and downstream, even down to how much meat we serve at barbecues. It was a rigorous process. So what did we learn from all this data? The most obvious one is our use of aluminium. This accounted for 58.4% of our total emissions. This had to be tackled first. Scope 1 and 2 in yellow and green are the emissions on the factory floor. Unfortunately, they have minimal impact. Real change had to come from outside the factory, or scope 3, as you can see in orange. Collaboration with our suppliers and partners was key. Interestingly, if we choose suppliers who are also carbon neutral certified by Climate Active, they have no impact on our total emissions. The mutual benefit this creates is one of the most exciting aspects of collective climate action. But how do we deal with aluminium? We're advised by our certifier to focus on transitioning to low carbon aluminium instead of recycled aluminium. This was due to the current global shortage of scrap metal, which I think Jeff brought up. In this year alone, we have transitioned 100% of our aluminium battens to low carbon sourced from Queensland, which is about 40% of our aluminium use. Next, thank you. We all know that recycling is good for sustainability. However, there's one approach that is far more impactful and I'd argue not discussed enough in our industry. Next. And that is durability. A long-lasting product supported by easily replaceable parts over decades generates far fewer emissions than recycling or even returning goods for refurbishment. And I'd like to share a story of a chair, a behind-the-scenes look at a deceptively simple product. It is the part we don't see. The story starts with our movable forum seat released 8 years ago. Although the product was a commercial success, as always, called for further improvement. As many clients still prefer to bolt the chair to the ground, we needed to weld a plate for these situations. Welded plates were also needed for grass placement. 4 regular legs just poked holes in the ground. As David Martin knew from Sydney Olympic Park. Our casting needed more uniform wall thickness for better flow to minimize the reject rate of parts. We also wanted to strengthen the chair to protect against more extreme cases of vandalism. We didn't like the L brackets we bolted under the seat to prevent racking. We just didn't think it was sophisticated. And when aluminium battens were specified, clients expressed they didn't like seeing the end caps. And as always, we wanted to maximize the comfort of the chair. Here is the result in response to the brief. The seemingly simple transition took 18 months from start to finish, a process led by my very talented colleague, Francis McArdle. The designers first tested the backrest for comfort whilst adhering to DDA guidelines. From there, they experimented with numerous forms and 3D printed prototypes. If you ever come to our factory, there are lots of seats with do not sit signs on them. Lots of bins with do not use signs on them too. Our engineers got to work on what we affectionately called the torture chamber. Prototypes are pulled across slate tiles between 50,000 and 100,000 cycles. They also simulated a 100-kilogram person sitting up and down over many decades. Through all this testing, the smallest of details are added. Under the chair, where it is not visible, the security screws were positioned out of line to increase rigidity. And the plate that the battens sit on became shaped as tabs so that rainwater passes straight through the chair to prevent grime buildup. Other durability tests include resistance to vandalism, corrosion, fire and wind, as well as safety measures for temperature, tipping points, and gaps. We are also always exploring new materials and finishes. Our factory roof is covered with samples. And here is the finished product, the Piatto chair, just released this year. Continuous improvement has occurred for 8 years on this product, and the process is ongoing, and that goes for everything we do. It is not easy to make products last for decades in the public realm, but we believe that the pursuit of durability is one of the best things we can do for the planet. So when prioritizing durability and sustainability, we offer 5 practical tips. Number 1, quality over cheap. If budget is a constraint, just buy less. We know that sounds weird coming from a business, but please buy less, but buy well. Public space should always demand quality, plus it will save you money in the long run. Go tried and tested, not custom. I'm sorry, landscape architects and architects. You are our most valued customer base. Custom products are essentially one-off prototypes. And in our experience, there are always countless aspects to improve. If you need something site-specific, consider tailoring a core product so you get the best of both worlds. Timeless is better than fashionable. Will your product still look good in 10, 20, and 30 years' time? Strong is better than flimsy. A product is not a building material. Lightweight is not always sustainable, especially if it compromises strength and durability. And choose serviceable, not hard to maintain. Always defend your right to repair. Ensure products are designed for part replacement on site and your manufacturer can be easily accessed. And to finish, I leave you with a quote from American writer Maya Angelou. Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. Chiara chose this quote to sum up her climate action strategy, which I thought was perfect. Thank you for the opportunity to share our work and discuss this important topic with you today. Thank you.
What an incredibly inspirational way to finish. Thank you very much, June. Please join me once again in thanking our last four speakers, Eshita, Jeff, Rose, and June. Thank you. Once again, apart from you obviously continually thanking Street Furniture Australia for the partnership, I think a fantastic lineup and program today. So often you come to events discussing climate change and climate action and leaving doom and gloom or hearing the same stories. But I think all of us will be leaving inspired today, knowing that action isn't only possible, but actually have a number of different ways for us to be able to form action immediately following this particular day. So thank you, June. With that, we are going to have another short break. Please make sure you're back here by 11 o'clock when we will commence our panels. Thank you.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Yes? Welcome back. For those that don't know me, my name's Josh French. I'm Chief Exec of Greater Sydney Parklands. We're the custodians of Sydney's iconic urban parklands. So Fernhill Estate out at the foot of the Blue Mountains, Western Sydney Parklands, which I've sent an image up this morning of, Parramatta Park with Starry Gardens in Parramatta, Callan Park and Centennial Park, Moore Park and Queen's Park, which is Centennial Parkland. So thank you for having me here today. It's so lovely to see so many friends and colleagues and meet new people. So it's delightful. I have the pleasure to chair two panels. So we're going to do one panel, half an hour. I'm going to expect lots of questions from the audience. So please start preparing. And then the second, we'll have a second group that come up and we'll do some Q&A with them. I have declined the Madonna mic. So I'm behind the podium. I was offered the Madonna mic, but with the clicker infrastructure concerns, I decided to not take it on, but I will be channeling Madonna because I have realised today I have become an old fart in the industry like Madonna has. And I'll also channel Oprah because we want a lot of engagement and good time management. So wish me luck. So firstly, thank you everyone up here. What a great lineup. The number one thing I heard as a common theme was change management. I just kept on hearing change management. And in the words of Martin Luther King, change does not roll in on the wheels of inevitability, but comes through continuous struggle. And I think that's what we're all working through in the industry at the moment. So I would like to throw to a couple of the panel before I throw to the audience about your number one tip for change in your work. And maybe June will start with you if you're happy with that.
Sorry, was that the question?
Yeah, change. What's your number one tip for getting change through in the work that you do?
How do we get change through in the workplace?
Yeah.
Well, in this case, becoming carbon neutral, we presented a business case to the board, and we talked about the impact of doing nothing and the return on investment and so on, because we are a business at the end of the day. But at the end of the day, we were just really lucky because everyone in our company is passionate about climate action. and they want to do the right thing. So I don't know if that answered your question,
no,
but yeah, that's one small facet of change management at Street Furniture Australia.
Rose, do you want to?
Sure, thank you. From a product stewardship perspective, government regulation is what we need to create a level playing field for the producers and the manufacturers to make sure that they all step up and take greater responsibility for the products, because you have some companies there, like as Street Furniture Australia, who are being very proactive and really taking a lot of responsibility in how they design product and also what they ensure its management throughout the life. And if I think about other, like say electronics, for instance, or solar panels, we really need a lot more regulatory intervention to ensure all the manufacturers participate, but also to deal with the issues. And I think this is something that came up with the aluminium, was about importing and what's being imported into the country, because we're actually importing a lot of problems.
Jet, let's go down.
I would say be persistent. Anytime, and we found this in MECLA quite a lot, anytime you're looking to kind of bring about change, you're doing something for the first time, there's a lot of people that will say, no, it's too hard, can't be done, out of our hands, takes too long, whatever. It just, everywhere you looked. And so we did a lot of, I mean, like we got a lot of people together out of that ecosystem to try and understand what the issues were from different points of view. We thought we got our heads around it, but what we wanted to do was then take and share some of those case studies with industry. So we had online, what we called deep dives with main contractors and main facade subcontractors as a group. Then we had them with developers and owners and that group, and then also designers. And it was really interesting to hear different perspectives. Actually, it was the people that were building the most that were really, really resisting change. And once you, I kind of set them up, actually. It was not very nice, but you know, we bring it, talk about money. How much does it cost? And they go, oh, it's 30% more, it's double. It's, you know, like literally we got double the price on a facade package. And then you show them a case study and you show them the real data, and then they kind of go, oh. And then now that we've got other case studies that prove it, yeah, it's all about persistence.
Eshita?
Jeff, change resistance, talk about it with smart technology in the space I work with. So I think the top tip from my end and working in this space would be that technology is good. Embrace technology. It can feel a bit scary with privacy concerns and what people think about technology as being for surveillance and all the non-positive and all the negative stuff. But there's a lot technology can help you with, and using these tools can make our lives easier and make it easier for us to analyze large data sets at more ease than was possible before. So technology can be your friend, use it to your advantage.
David?
I think just quoting Jeff and something that we did with June back during the COVID response in Homophile Olympic Park, it starts with deep listening and deep thinking and deep dives with a lot of people. And I think that to form that coalition of the willing for change, you've got to understand the shared vision, but I think you've got to understand a bit like this National Green Infrastructure Round Table, where there's 12 people sitting around the table. Everyone's got a slightly different perspective on the challenges and the opportunities, and you have to put the time in to understand what's their particular perspective that may not be something you share with, but you've got to say with collective impact, you know, and that change that comes through that kind of deep listening and deep thinking and deep diving, you know, with the, as they say, and this is going to be the final line of my presentation, with the teamwork comes the dream work.
Mm-hmm. Now, Martin, you're up on stage a little bit early for your panel. You're in the next, oh, Sebastian, sorry. You look so much Martin from the side. No, Sebastian. That was a joke. Tell us about your, I mean, you've been through so much change. Tell us about that. Well, everyone knows Sebastian so well, don't they? Sorry to throw you. I didn't mean to.
That's okay. That's okay. Just last week I was in another.
It's the shirts.
I was in another forum and somebody called me Stephen, and I didn't even respond. But anyway, look, change and change management from a science perspective, I think the most important bit, and this is where we always struggle also to work with industry, is to embed in our projects a kind of a permit to fail. Because in science, only when we fail, we learn. I don't get any progress without doing things wrong. Otherwise, I already know what I have to do, so I don't need science. So for me as a philosophy really is when I work with industry partners to make it very clear that in the end, we don't aim to fail, but it should be okay to fail, because then we have a real chance to implement change and have change based on learning, not based on, you know, a budget sheet or based on what the board wants to hear or what shareholders want to hear, but based on learned experience. And I'm, as you know, I'm steeply involved in empirical data. I'm not much model friendly scientist. So when I measure things, I know what we're dealing with. So it's also this empirical kind of work that's really important when we want to inform change. Because once you see those infrared images, there's not much you can say about it. You just see, and it tells you the story that dark roofs are hot or unshaded streets are hot, and then you can work on that. So yeah, failure.
Great. Now, are there any questions from the floor? Oh, yeah. Fiona, we have a roving mic. And do you want to introduce yourself? And then is this question for everyone or for a specific member? Yes, it is now.
Hi, my name is Fiona McCall and I work for the Office of Sport. I'm a strategic planner and a landscape architect, so I sort of stand on both sides of the fence on that one. We're all talking here, we're all singing to the same songbook, and the choir knows what we need to do, but we're not the people who are the major builders. How are we going to get the property council, the developers, big and small, there's a lot of small ones out there who just want to slapdash, throw a house up and walk away? They don't care about the streets because they're not going to live in it. How are we going to get the mass housing market to change?
Sebastian, would you like to
Take it.
start?
Of
And then
course
maybe
I'll take
and then Jeff, I'll throw to you.
I kind of disagree that it's only the big developers, because it's really everyone, and the ones that are building, yes, the ones that are building all those sprawling suburbs are to a large degree those small and medium companies that just repeat that kind of concept of the McMansion. I think there's a much bigger question behind your question, which is a cultural shift that we need for the acceptance of doing apartments really well. And that just hasn't happened. I mean, I work in Western Sydney. You will find a lot of people that work and live in these new suburbs, and they're really, really happy. They come from places, let's say, the Middle East and the Orient, where they live community in a different way than you would have done in the 50s, 60s, and 70s here in Australia. They already live very, very close together. Now, for them, living about a meter next door to your neighbor is totally fine, because that's your community, and you hear when they have trouble, you know, you are living with them. So this concept of still living in your own home, which is a huge achievement for those, and it's mostly migrants coming to live in these areas because it's too expensive to live anywhere else. So for these parts of the Australian population, it's absolutely fine. We should not forget that. For them, that is the Australian dream. What I'm publicly on record to call it the Australian nightmare, because it locks us into so many problems. Yes, we have to take these people with us and on board in this discussion about accepting that when we build flat and wide, we see the trouble that we're creating, and now we have done so over 20 or 30 years. How do we get people to go compact and up? Because to me, smart density and climate responsive design is all about using less space and probably even using the existing infrastructure to build on top of that. And there are concepts coming out of Europe, very interesting concepts, where you use, for example, your shopping center, and if it's structurally sound or you re-engineer it, you build another 5 stories on top of that, and that becomes apartments. So there are new concepts. It's not all bad. But I think the discussion behind it is really a bigger one that goes much more into acceptance of living not on your formerly quarter-acre block that doesn't exist anymore, because now it's 300 square meters or even less, and that it is okay to build good multi-story apartment buildings and build, 10 of them, but then leave the remaining space open for recreation and for biodiversity and all those other aspects. We did some work, and I just will finish on that point.
Yeah.
We did some work with with Campbelltown, and it clearly showed a very intensive analysis of urban space and how tree canopy cover and open space influences air temperatures compared to the gray infrastructure. And the result was really clear. You need to balance your urban development. You need to have 66% open and green space compared to 33% of your your gray cover of roads, buildings, and so on. So it's 2 to 1. That would at least give us no additional warming. And of course, when you look at Western Sydney, it's 80% grey infrastructure, 10% green, maybe 10% open. It's totally skewed. So we will never get in this type of development to a point where it's not introducing more heat. We really have to fundamentally shift that.
How do we get industry to take that on and develop properly? Not do the snorkel apartments. And I stayed in one in Europe not long ago, and it was really weird. But how do we shift the industry? Government's going that way anyway. How do we stop the industry continuously arguing with us?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure government's going fast enough, to be honest.
No.
I think if we think that industry, out of the goodness of our own hearts, is going to do all this stuff, I mean, I'm an architect. I like to think I have vision or dream about these sorts of things. I'm working on a mixed-use precinct at the moment where, to be quite honest with you, if it turns up to be 1,100 build to sell unaffordable apartments, I'm happy to walk away because it's not interesting for me. So I don't think industry developers, large, big, or small, will actually get there on their own. There's a lot of statements, there's a lot of publications about what we're doing and, to be sustainable, but I think it actually comes with more government regulation and incentives. You're starting to see it overseas. I don't think it will start to happen here meaningfully unless we start to introduce targets, mandatory, real targets on things like embodied carbon, social health, all those sorts of things.
David, do you want to just close that?
Yeah, I just would say to Fiona, look, with the handbook, sort of starting the conversation, the submission that the Australian Sustainable Built Environment Council put to the federal government, importantly, one of the key members of that group is the Property Council. We've got the Green Building Council. They're not surprising they're there, but you've also got groups like Facility Management Australia. So these are key players. Facility Management Australia was one of the contributors to the handbook with their CEO, Nick Burt. There's a lot of work to be done in that space, but also I think the Property Council agreed in that submission to the federal government around the top 6, that the 6th most important thing was they have agreed and signed on to the development of a national urban greening framework. So I think I am hopeful. It's not going to change overnight, but at least they have signed up and they're part of that. The next step with the federal government is to work in partnership. So, this change is going to be gradual, but I think it's getting there.
Thanks. And then I have an online question. Do you want to take the mic over?
This is Cash Rangan from CM Plus, Architects and Urban Designers. Look, David, I think you closed it, but I think I'd like to continue the conversation a bit, make a comment on that and share some thoughts. Fiona, just about the industry, I think in this forum it's a bunch of architects and urban designers and landscape designers, plus we've got government representatives from the council, so it's sort of the right forum to do this. But I think one of the ways we think we can bring up that change is perhaps through the regulations that the contractors and the developers can understand best. SWTCs, SBRs, whatever they call them, they've got multiple abbreviations nowadays. If we actually stipulate a simple thing like you've got to do this, must do, contractors understand that language. It's in their deed, and it's about compliance. So if it's actually inbuilt into the policy making of all the people who make the regulations and inbuilt into those documents as part of the requirements for delivery, then that sort of gets into the eyes of the developers and the contractors And perhaps that's one of the ways to actually enforce them. An example of that is we do have sort of motherhood statements to say, you got to do this to reduce heat island. That's not enough for the contractors, because first of all, the contractors don't understand what reducing heat island is in the first place. We've got to go more into it, into sort of developing as part of people who are writing these documents to say, what does it actually mean by reducing urban heat? The biggest way, and it needs to be a hierarchical method of what that definition is. The first, obviously, all of us understand in this room, you can do that best, and it's obvious from today's conversations about increasing canopy cover, tree cover. There's no better way to do that. That's the best way. We heard that in the conversation and the presentations about it's not a little plant or a little a small gesture there. It needs to be at the scale. Scale was something very important. I think, Sebastian, you raised that in your presentation. If we actually go down to the next level to make the contractors understand in their language that this is what is required for you to do, then they take it up as a challenge because it isn't their deed. And so it'll be built into the delivery method that the consultants, such as us, will have to, deliver that as part of the understanding in the contractor's language. That might be one thing that we can probably, as a fraternity, get that into the systems for these guys who are going to make the call to build it, to see that change in terms of that change in management. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I've got an online question that I'll do first. And Eshita, I'll go throw to you for the answer. And then perhaps either June or Rose. How do you deal with storing the large data sets that Smart Tech provides?
That's a very interesting question. Thank you. Because we are in the early stages within Cumberland City Council, we are looking at storing them either internally or storing them on the cloud. We use services of providers that can store this data for us and process this data for us. But as we grow and as we get more mature, I think we will internally have to start looking for systems that we can control and that we own so that we can store those data sets internally. It is going to be a bit of a challenge, but we are seeing newer and newer ways of compressing data sets and keeping the information or filtering out the information that's most useful for us and possibly, archiving the rest to sort of help with storage. So I think that would probably be the way to go. There will be a level of maturity that we come to later on in this, but the change will come. I'm quite certain of that.
Thanks. Anything to add? No? Any insights from the floor on data? Sarah? Oh, you've got to change. No.
Thanks, Josh. Sarah Kierskard, Director of Landscape Architecture at UNSW. I think one of the aspects that's missing from change is around advocacy and leadership. So, advocacy is a core pillar of ALA and many of our other allied disciplines. And we are landscape architects, not landscape designers. I'll just stress that. But I really like to install in our students the real need to be great leaders. And with that is to have good conversations, to believe in advocacy, design, activism, and leadership. There's a couple of graduates in the room here. I want every student that graduates from a landscape architecture program in this country to feel they can sit amongst senior professionals and have these conversations, to ask in their practices for change to happen. And so I think if we actually start in the grassroots around encouraging leadership as a soft skill and advocacy is a soft skill in our programs as well as in our offices, then we're going to have much better leaders in the future.
Beautiful. Yeah. There's someone just behind Sarah.
Oh, sorry.
Morning, everyone. My name is Akshay. We're from Mode Design. This question's probably for Professor Pfautsch, maybe Eshita, and maybe on a smaller scale for June. What are some potential blind spots in the data harnessing or capturing that you're facing, and also the challenges faced in capturing and building this extensive database over, a certain number of years?
Can you be a little bit more explicit?
Sure.
What do you think are blind spots?
Yeah.
What are you suggesting?
What sort of data are you not able to capture, or are you facing difficulties in capturing in terms of how to tackle urban heat island effects or so on?
I can give you one very practical example. Thank you. Now that I understand where you're heading. When you develop a master plan community, You sit around the table with the people that map it out. And then at some point when it's approved, they start constructing. We, from a research perspective, always miss out to go in before that happens, to actually collect the data on the land untouched, and then follow through the development process and really have the capacity, because this is a process probably looking at 5, maybe even 10 years, to have the long breath to go into full occupancy and usage of that suburb, to understand what that means. And I'm just talking about climate and heat and these kind of impacts for the local environment. We still don't have, coming from the empirical side, we still don't have good data on that process and what that means to the microclimates that you are transforming. There's a real blind spot there. We now have, with a new Sydney Science Park, CSIRO, and I think it's Celestino, we have the opportunity to collect pre-development data, and we're doing that right now. We did it last summer. We're probably going again. That's for the first time the only project that I know in Greater Sydney where we are able to collect some data before development happens. We did a little bit of work with Campbelltown in Menangle and Menangle Park, where also the place, when we were there 2018-19, it was still a paddock. And now you drive down there and you see all the infrastructure is laid out and it's starting to become the suburbs. And Campbelltown is very interested in revisiting exactly those locations where we collected measurements, and then we can actually compare before and after. And that comes from ecological research that uses the Baci approach. It's not the chocolates from Italy. It's before, after impact control. So you really need to have a very good framework in your experimental design that allows you to separate if a site was different before you actually started doing anything from your control side. And this ecological design really requires us to be in early. That's one of the examples that I can give you that we just don't know, because we never get the chance to work with these people way before development starts to happen. Anyone else?
Do you want to add to that, or Eshita? Yeah.
Yep. Thanks for the question, Akshay. I think I'm sitting in a very good place on the panel because I'm in the middle. It gives me enough time to think of the answers before the answer this. My answer to that question would be the blind spots that we have is sometimes with qualitative data, and we have enough capacity, or sometimes we have the resources to be able to collect quantitative data at scale, but it's the qualitative sometimes. It's just understanding from people what really matters to them and how much they're affected by certain problems that we find it difficult because of resourcing or funding to try and collect that level of data at scale. And once we even have some of the qualitative data, it might be hard to actually analyze it and put that to use within planning and policy. We try our best through community engagement sessions and all of those things, but sometimes qualitative can be a little hard to get as well as process. And an example I can give you is I've seen this happen in another council where they were looking at consolidating all their urban open spaces. So instead of having 3 or 4 little pocket parks, they thought having a large premier destination that combines all the facilities of those 4 pocket parks into one central location would be best for the community. But what actually happened is there was a settlement or a group of seniors living near one of those pocket parks, and that was the only urban open space that they had access to, and that was the only shaded area they could use. But now that that pocket park was gone and a new destination site was created further away, they didn't have the means or resources to actually access it. So it's that qualitative data that's really important to understand.
Do you want to add to that, June? Oh, and then David?
Testing. Yeah, so we've had some experience working on smart cities projects. Dr. Linda Corkery is here. We collaborated with her. So I think the blind spot with data is it's useless without understanding what problem you're trying to solve. So what are the pain points? What are you trying to do here? And sometimes people forget to ask that question before diving right in. The qualitative is hugely important. We use human-centered research strategies where we observe. For example, in Mortdale, we observed 2 Italian men sitting for hours, sort of crouched, talking on a bench. And so, we thought a long communal table taking up 2 parking spots, which was controversial, but that's another story. For them to gather and do that comfortably, and that those sorts of insights don't come from data; they come from stories. Asking questions like, "How does this place make you feel?" You know, tell us the happiest memory from this space. Getting those stories and finding those nuggets.
David, just quickly.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment that around this data set collection, and it's probably on a macro scale. I know that my colleague, Dr. Pfautsch, has been doing a lot of work for individual local government areas, particularly in Western Sydney and out where I live in Willoughby. But certainly the feedback that I've heard when I was in Brisbane and Perth just last week, one of the big challenges there is one thing is to get that data set. But in the submission that was made to the federal government around the national urban policy, one of the other reports that the federal government now does is called the State of the Cities Reporting. And we're trying to get a consistent data capture. So even though we know that I think over 80% of metropolitan councils have an urban forestry strategy in Australia now, most of those canopies are going backwards. In Perth, they want to capture canopy loss, canopy growth, canopy stress. And they also want to bring in things like obesity mapping and some of these other data sets. But at the moment, one of the biggest challenges is that there's no agreed standard. This was reinforced down in Melbourne, that even though that data's there, the other issue is getting access to the data and having that consistent data capture across cities that's maybe using a nationally agreed method.
Thanks, David. We are out of time for this panel, but I would like to just throw Rose to you for one closing remark. You talked about circularity, use less, extend product lifestyle, and keep materials in the economy. What can you recommend to designers here today to put it front of mind when they're thinking about circularity? Sorry, no, these panel members had no warning about these questions, so I do apologise.
I mean, they have a really important role in the decisions made at that point have so much influence on what materials you're using, you know, how so it just shapes it so importantly. I mean, 80% of the impact is at the design. You can what you decide at the design thing influences 80% of the environmental impact. So as a designer, as a procurer, and local councils as well, as a procurer, you have to start understanding the materials and products better, and you have to understand how you can keep them in the economy longer and make sure you're choosing the right materials and products so that they do that.
Fabulous. Thank you for the questions from the floor. And Sarah, thank you for yours. I work on the 5 C's of change: communication, commitment, culture, capability, and coordination. I'm going to add advocacy as the sort of encircling, you know, umbrella kind of theme. So I really appreciate that insight. If we can please thank our panel, Sebastian, David, Eshita, Jeff, Rose, and June. They will now leave the stage. You all need to clear off. Please stay seated, everyone. And our topic now is the future of Western Sydney, to understand how the local built environment sector is responding to a changing climate. So welcome to the stage. Where's the gender balance? We had it last panel. Yeah, that's right. You are the Fiona Morrison substitute, so we will channel Fiona Morrison. Look, in 60 seconds or less, okay? Tell us what you're working on and how much is climate action prioritised in that work. Now, who would like to start? No, is that working? Try the other one.
Technology, that's better. We're working on a whole range of things. Possible as a one, and yes, climate action is, of course, very important, as is green infrastructure and views of green. So we're trying very, very hard to make sure that that's part of what we do. About 60 seconds.
That was like 25, I reckon.
Yeah, I think the Parks for People program that some of you are probably aware of, that one is a program that we run that goes from sort of finding the sites all the way through to delivery. So through that process, we're looking at landscape performance. So that's a lot of the things that Sebastian was talking about before, just in terms of how do we understand the impact that these projects are having. We've all got good intentions going in there, planting trees, new paths, playgrounds, all of that. But what does all that mean from a climate impact perspective? So the work that we're doing is trying to measure that and help the industry understand better how we can do it better.
Yeah, I'm fortunate enough because Sebastian and Eshita have already talked a lot about what Cumberland's been doing. But yeah, we've got a range of professionals, whether it be our environmental team, our place team, planners, designers, engineers, all doing their bit to advance kind of climate positive thinking. But if I want to think about one example, our team's working on the upcoming play spaces strategy, and what we've been able to do is bake in a lot of the learnings that we've got from our work with Sebastian and look through rich data sets that we have and look at play spaces that have shade cover. What's the tree canopy like? Is there access to water? What are the materials there? And then the ones that are scoring poorly, bringing them up in priority. So that's one example of what we're doing.
Landscape architecture at Parramatta is pretty of an exciting time, I think. We've got several projects that integrate blue and green infrastructure. We've got several projects along Parramatta River, along the Duck Creek, as well as here in the CBD and our satellite centres. So yeah, we've got a combination of interventions and things that we're trying to achieve and advocate for. And I think we're doing a pretty good job at that so far. Yep.
At Penrith, we're continuing to deliver our Cooling the City strategy. So that was adopted back in 2015 and has partially been updated in our Resilient Penrith Action Plan a couple of years ago. Some of the key actions we've delivered recently is City Park in our CBD. So that was previously a site that was a car park and low density in terms of commercial development. And it's now 7,000 square metre green space right near our train station and our Westfield as well. So creating a cool, livable space in our city centre. So that way we've got a place for people to come and connect with each other. A lot of my work in the last few years has been doing flood recovery. And what's really coming through the research coming from there, from Daniel Aldrich, particularly in the States, is the importance of social capital and social connectiveness, and also social infrastructure. So where you meet and connect with each other, or the third place, as it's often called as well. So for us, it's really looking at what is the role of that. And as Western Sydney gets hotter, how do we collectively, as councils and built environment professionals, create those spaces for community connect with each other during the hot weather?
Martin, I want to ask you a question about the climate positive guidelines that Ayla prepared. Can you share the your insights on the guidelines as leading that project and give a bit of an overview?
Yes, well, in 2018, I approached Ayla about why don't you have anything on net positive and net zero or climate? And they said, oh, would you like to write it for us? So 1,000 hours later, yes. We obviously got together and got our committee together, but one of the main things, obviously, I had brought props with me. I went, you can, it's been downloaded about 2,500 times now, but you can go to the Ayla website and Ayla Climate Positive Design. But I guess what we were trying to do is how do we make this simple and easy for people and provide guidelines? So it was try to be simple, clear message. So a lot of these are one idea per column with a bit of an abstract and then checkpoints, do this, do this, do this. So we're trying to make it as easy as possible. Cool green cities, resilience, also about adaptation mitigation. And we've also got a very strong Aboriginal perspective in there as well. So definitely download it if you haven't already. Happy to talk about it anytime.
Have we got any early participators in the crowd that want to ask a question? I have a few more up my sleeve. If they're, oh, sorry. We do. Yeah. Hands up. Yeah. Oh, and sorry, Julie. Go to Julie first. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Yes, I've been a landscape architect for a really long time, and I just think I wanted to share a few things about two things really that haven't been talked much today. One is about First Nations involvement and connection with country, so I'll stand up. And the second one is about heritage conservation and how heritage conservation talks about sustainability and also about landscape analysis, really, which I think is what Sebastian was talking about before. As landscape architects, we think about sites all the time, how they are before we got there. If you're a heritage consultant and you're thinking about the impact of a development, the first thing you think of is what happens if I don't do anything? And as a landscape architect, that's how I've tried to lead my practice and take a world view that if you can do less, do less. If you need a retaining wall, think of, do you need it or not? Do you need to use that material? Will it help the site? Could you use trees where other things, do you need hard shade and so on? So I think one of the things we need to do is to think about all of these things holistically, and it's the same with the disciplines as well. Industrial design, architecture, landscape architecture, we're all really doing the same things. So it's working together, it's thinking about sites, and it's also involving First Nations people in our sites. I think landscape architects have got really good at that because we've taken so much of an interest in country. But we need to talk to elders, talk to people on site. Certainly we did that with the Parks for People series that we've been working with Ahmed as well. It's about getting their point of view and the things that you can learn about a site, the poetic side of it, how it would have been used, and bring that humility in a sense into the work. So I think there's a lot of things I've learned over many years in this industry, but things that simplicity is best, less is more, all those things are really important.
That's beautiful. Thanks, Julie. If I'm Madonna, you can be Cher. Do you want to, anyone from the panel want to reflect on that? I mean, I think, Matt, I think would be beneficial just to reflect on one of the Parks for People programs where you've really embedded that thinking into the work.
Yeah, well, I'm relatively new to the team, so I can't talk with too much authority on that. But look, I completely agree that less is more. As much as you can work with the site. I love surface design. The guys in California, that the project that they presented at the AILA last year at the AILA festival, where they basically just worked with everything that was on site. So they were chopping up old concrete slabs and turning them into pavers. They were finding just rekindling old seeds that have been sitting dormant in the ground. So they basically just created a park out of everything that was there. If everyone started with that intention on a project and then just started trying to bring in what they needed when they needed it, I think it'd just change the whole mindset of the way that we think about doing parks. So
it's a really lovely connection to Rose. And then Junior, where you made every landscape architect shudder when you said don't do custom, but it's all a connected conversation. Yeah, do you want to?
Hi, everyone. Riley Jeong from Blythe Channa. I guess as the water engineer who managed to sneak in, I'm interested in this kind of combined climate risks. But we've talked a lot about urban heat, but we also know that particularly in Western Sydney, there's a drying climate, but also likely more intense short duration rainfall events. And I guess I see that it's difficult to talk about increasing canopy cover and green without the blue. So I'm curious, as an engineer in a room with architects and landscape architects and policymakers, what do you see as the challenges, or maybe like a better way to ask that is like, how can we better collaborate to actually avoid decoupling stormwater and the blue from the green in the context of urban design for a future climate?
Adam, do you want to take that one?
Got a project at Wentworth Point. So Wentworth Point is the most densely populated, high density area in Australia. They've got one really major road in and out, that's Hill Road. And the Hill Road is the old industrial road as it was back in the day, hasn't been upgraded. And so we're going through an exercise where during a high tide event and then a storm event, the actual Hill Road floods and no one can access the suburb. So it's quite a significant issue. What we went through is a process of a master plan for Hill Road. We established, yes, a connection to the infrastructure, green and blue, where we can work out a way to capture that drainage and also maybe repurpose it or reuse it or harvest it in some way to reduce the impact of to the street and keeping it open if we can. So it's a big challenge to separate them out or decouple, I think you said, because I heard in many instances that I've experienced they do go hand in hand. But that's certainly one where, you know, we have very low road, you know, not close to sea level, sea level rise being an issue. And then even the buildings and the residential areas are very low as well. So there's a high risk there with sea level rise that that in time, yeah, if we don't address it now, it will become a major issue down the track.
Andrew, anything to add from Penrith Council?
I think one of the challenges is historically water has been quite cheap, and as a result, we haven't valued it as well. So collectively, what we haven't done is work really well to reuse and capture rainwater. Sebastian had some great examples of really low scale, small scale interventions to get infiltration and that kind of thing. What we need to do that is on a broader scale. But it's been hard to justify because of the costs involved and the cost savings just aren't there compared to energy work at a council. It pays for itself. Like the amount of energy saving work we've been able to do because there's a direct cost correlation there compared to water is significant. And that's been one of our constant challenges as a council is how do you get that balance right? Our emissions targets are going amazingly well. Our water, apart from doing things like water tanks, we've struggled with because that cost benefit isn't there. So, and it was just announced recently that Sydney Water are looking at ways they can future-proof their business and looking at costing around water, but also different options for water supply. So I think that'll be interesting to see how that shifts thinking around water as well.
Ahmed, I'll throw to you for a question. Where do you want to be in terms of climate action in your organisation in the future?
Well, yeah, that's, I think of the word resilience and what that means in this context. And I think of, you know, what are the options for our residents on a hot day? Do they feel like they need to escape to the eastern suburbs to cool down or be locked up at home all day under the air condition? Or are they too afraid to go to the playground, their local playground, on a hot day for fear of getting injured, burnt? Or conversely, with the storm events, the more intense storm events, you know, not having the opportunity to participate in sports. So, yeah, I see the future as like addressing those questions and making sure that we are more resilient.
Is there any other questions from the floor that people want to put up? We've got one up the back.
Sorry, this is a bit of an insider question. I'm Francis from SFA, but I had a question about, been having some recent conversations with landscape architects, and I guess the housing crisis and densification seems to be sort of top of mind, and trying to build more houses and how we do that, but sort of thinking about what impact that has on the public spaces and those shared spaces becoming a premium. And I guess my question to all of you is, what do these public spaces, I guess I'm thinking more in sort of tighter environments, what do they need to do differently or adapt to that they're not doing now? Or do they need to do anything different? I guess is sort of the question, like how do they respond to that, cramming in more houses to limited space?
Matt or Martin, do you want to take that? Matt, if you're going to be Fiona, you've got to answer some questions.
No, it's a good one because we're working on the TODs at the moment, and it's so challenging. Like there is, as soon as you get an announcement that it's going 30 stories, the land values go up, and then you've got to try to find additional open space at the same time. So it is really hard. But I think what you're saying is right. Having a diversity in the use of as much open space as you do have available is the starting point, but also trying to secure as much additional open space as you can, because when you just get sheer additional numbers, I think quantity is important, and it's not just about having higher quality, harder working spaces, but it is definitely got to be part of the solution. So looking at things like car parks that might be full during the day, empty at night, can they be used for courts and things like that to help support a growing need for that type of use at night time? So just looking at the space that we have in a unique way and seeing what we can do that might be a little bit out of the norm. But yeah, at the end of the day, I think it'd be good if we got an announcement slightly before about housing so that we could secure more open space.
Ahmed, did you want to add to that?
Just a minor thing after that, June was talking about, quality over quantity, just not to contradict what you just said, but making sure that we're putting in durable, long-lasting items in these spaces, because they will inevitably break due to the more frequent use. So yeah, just a little comment there.
Sebastian, you wanted to add to that? Is your voice loud? You can just...
Look at more density where we have the podium level that we're not really utilizing very well for public open spaces, because most of the time that's still strata title or management by the building owners and managers. So maybe there's space there that we underutilize, and then there's of course vertical space plus rooftop space, and we haven't really found ways on a mass scale to activate that kind of space. So I think if there is more density, we just have to be thinking a little bit outside the box, maybe also new concepts like shared strata with public space and so on, to just have more space available for more people.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, and New York's been doing that for a long time, and they're quite advanced in that you can go on the app and find rooftop spaces that aren't necessarily visually accessible from the street. But I think we're a long way off that, just culturally in Australia, and just in terms of the legislation, how it's currently works. But I'm a massive advocate for the rooftops as well. It's just figuring out how to make that work with the private sector. Yeah.
Schools, yeah.
I'll just add to that. I'll keep it very brief. We're also working on some of these TOD programs, and one of the issues is you don't see any green on the plans, the big plans. There's no green. There's been no purchase of open space. And it's then up to the developer to then find that open space, and it's very, very difficult to actually get enough. So to Sebastian's point, one of the things that we need to obviously do is make those podium levels, which are basically non-publicly accessible mostly because they're up above, but they need to function for the residents so that they take the pressure off trying to make the existing parks work even better. But it is a serious challenge, and yeah, one of the projects we're working on, putting an entire new suburbs worth of people into a place that has virtually no open space already. It's a major challenge.
Just
question here when you're ready.
Yeah, well, I'll ask one question, then I'll come to you. Just could be one or two of you. Just share some of the barriers you've encountered in rolling out positive climate action in your projects and how you overcame them. So who wants to take that question?
I can start. So a project that comes to mind is just over the way back there. We've got a multi-deck car park, much along the lines we were just talking about in terms of what are those elements from a landscape architecture point of view we can add to them, like utilising the roof for social gatherings or for social activities. But the challenge, I think it's not sexy, a car park, multi-deck car park, but I think the advocacy of landscape architecture and the involvement that we've had, we've been able to suggest a green wall and solar power to supply power for EV parking. So there are all these great initiatives that we're looking to achieve, but the challenge is to try and get the buy-in from the people, the other project people and the people who are manage that asset. And then additionally, the other factor is probably the funding source, because the funding goes primarily to where it's needed most. And something like a green wall is a really nice to have. and there's very limited opportunity in grants and funding to actually support something like that. So yeah, changing hearts and minds and funding, I think.
Yeah, funding. Yeah. Oh, who is it?
Thank you. So this is Nazanin Nazim Pano. I'm urban designer, landscape architect from City of Parramatta. This is not really a question. It's more of a challenge we're dealing with every day. And it's about our biggest road developer in the state. We all know transport is important. We need all of these infrastructure. But when it comes to the projects that Transport for New South Wales is going to deliver, most of the time, we're dealing with lots of issues. Trees are going to be removed. Yes, we have all of these offset strategies, but trees are going to be replanted in the places which is available, which is already fully planted with all kinds of trees. So basically, we don't get any trees on the roads that we need them the most. And there are lots of other things. So we still see all of these massive, expansion of roads. James Roos Drive is coming. I'm telling you, there is a massive intersection which it's proposed, and it will take you 15 minutes to walk from one corner to the other corner, basically. But we see other examples around the world. We don't need all of these, big roads carving the land anymore. They build things and parklands above them. Why we still have the same, situation going on? Why there is no real change here, which we definitely needed. We don't have much land. Land is very expensive in Sydney. Why we still prioritize building all of these roads and infrastructure, which of course it is needed, but there are better ways to do them.
Does anyone want to reflect on that?
I mean, I've grown up in Western Sydney. It's fair to say the public transport system and network isn't a network. There's a line straight into Sydney and out. And if you want to get across Western Sydney, it's just not convenient. So I think one of the challenges is we can create pockets of really good walkable neighborhoods, but still to get across the city in a holistic way, we're not doing that very well as a city. It's getting better with things like the new metro lines and things. So I think we're gradually getting better, but culturally we're still quite back in a very car-orientated city. Some really good research done by Abby Lopez when she was at Western Sydney Uni looking at cooling the commons. So they did research with people with disabilities, and when it's too hot, they literally can't cross some of our main roads in Western Sydney because they get heat exhaustion or heat stress waiting for the lights to change for them to cross. So not only is it a hot, barren landscape, but it's actually physically making it not accessible for people in our community to get across, things like roads, something quite simple.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just in terms of the barriers to climate action, coming from, I've only been in government for 9 months. So in my previous life in private practice, I think one of the main barriers there was having time to do things differently. So you're working to a deadline and you've got to design a concrete path, for example. You don't necessarily have the time to do the research to understand, is there low carbon concrete available? Is there a different detail for that? How does that actually work? Is there suppliers nearby? So I think now that I'm government side, I see our role as sort of leading, and through programs like Parks for People, leading the drive to make that more of a business as usual thing, and helping the industry understand the ways to do that, so that all the things that we've been talking about today, that I feel like that should be the baseline. All of the cool streets. Why are we still paving the roads with black tar everywhere? Like, if we've got another solution that's better, why isn't that the baseline? And I guess as government, we should be trying to lead the way and making that standard, and then we go from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Martin, I'll throw to you for final words. If you're a decision maker with ultimate say and infinite budget, what would you do?
A lot of money. I could go a long way. Yes, we could. Let's say we had 2 trees for every Australian. There's 50 million trees. That'd be a pretty good thing. I think, yeah, if we could start to sort of prioritise that idea of an environment for all, and how does that get managed? We're seeing a lot of this, like in terms of the thing that Julie raised about connection to country and these new urban spaces, which are very green and very biodiverse and very intensely green. We need to get people to see that as a resource and as an employment opportunity, and not a drain on money. It should be seen as something of value, which is that whole idea of infrastructure as value.
Yeah, the critical infrastructure conversation. Please join me in thanking our panel. Thanks, Martin, Matt, Ahmed, Adam, and Andrew. And thank you, everyone, for your participation. I will throw now very quickly to Ben to close.
Look, once again, we'll wrap this up quite quickly. Again, what a fantastic couple of panels there, and a huge range of topics, solutions, ideas, challenges that are covered that really represents the complexity of the landscape in which we all operate. To finalise, look, big, huge thank you to Street Furniture Australia. Thank you to Cumberland City Council. Teamwork really does make the dream work, and I think being able to model such a partnership today hopefully provides some inspiration for us all to go out there and continue our partnerships out there in the real world. I'd like to thank all of our speakers, all of those who have made the time out of your busy schedules. And it seems like everyone's October and November is exactly like mine, exceptionally busy. So we do appreciate you making the time to come in person. To our online guests, you're not here in person, but you're certainly not forgotten. So thank you all for joining us.